Welcome to the Infographics channel. Today we will discuss the infographic titled, The 20 Largest Consumer Markets in 2030, published by Visual Capitalist and prepared by Voronoi based on World Digital Lab data from 2023. At the beginning, I would like to point out that this is a projection for 2030, so there may be changes along the way. The subject of these predictions, i.e. the consumer population, as well as the relatively short deadline, allow us to assume that the prediction will turn out to be correct. In this infographic, a consumer is defined as someone who spends at least $12 per day. This gives monthly expenses of $360. We immediately note that the adopted definition of consumer will qualify almost the entire population of highly developed countries, most of the population of moderately developed countries, and only part of the population of underdeveloped countries. This is due to the fact that spending $12 a day is only a fraction of spending in rich countries, but a significant part of spending in poor countries. The graphics are divided by color into continents and countries. Under the country name, the number of population classified as consumers is given, i.e. the number of people in a given country spending the equivalent of $12 or more per day according to projections for 2030. Below there is an arrow showing the expected direction of development of the consumer market and the percentage change compared to 2024. We can clearly see that the graphic is dominated by Asian countries, marked with shades of red. In all Asian countries qualifying for the top 20 consumer markets except Japan, consumption is expected to grow by 10% to 59%, or from 1.5% to 10% annually. Taking into account the size of the population of these countries, we are talking about several hundred million new consumers. China takes the largest share of the pie, with a consumer market of 1.1 billion people. It should be noted that this number constitutes approximately 80% of the entire Chinese population. The second consumer market in the world and Asia in 2030 will be India with 773 million consumers. It is important to note that India will grow by 46%, which is 3 times greater than China's 15% growth, but the Indian market will still be 327 million consumers smaller than the Chinese market. Please realize that the growth in the number of consumers in India will be approximately 8% annually, which translates into approximately 100 million Indians per year qualifying for the group of people who can afford monthly expenses of $360. If this impressive rate of enrichment of India's population is maintained, the country has a chance to repeat the Chinese path started several decades ago. The third consumer market will remain the United States of America, where almost the entire population is classified as consuming at least $12 a day. Here it is important to note that in 2024 the U.S. population is approximately 340 million, so population growth to at least 348 million is taken into account. In the period until 2030, a moderate 4% increase in the number of consumers is expected. Next on the list is Indonesia, an island country in Asia, whose population today is about 280 million people, and in 6 years half of this population, about 158 million, will consume at least $12 a month. Fifth on the list is Brazil, with a population of 136 million consumers in 2030. That is, more than half of the country's population. The country's current population is approximately 220 million Brazilians. An intense growth of 9% is also expected there. The Russian Federation is sixth in the world, whose consumer market will be 127 million people, and the total population today is 150 million. This means that over 80% of the population will consume more than $12 a day. The expected lack of changes compared to 2024 is significant. Japan, with 118 million consumers, is experiencing a 3% decline and is an exception among the largest Asian countries and, next to Italy, an exception in the infographic presented today. Japan's population is 124 million people, which means almost all Japanese spend at least $12 a day, but the observed decline in the total population will negatively impact the consumer market. We remain in Asia, Pakistan and 99 million consumers. Very intense growth, 30%. Today's total population is approximately 250 million, but with positive demographic indicators recorded there. In 6 years it may be close to 300 million. Which would mean that 1 in 3 Pakistanis will spend at least $12 a day. We return again to North America, where Mexico, with growth of 9%, is expected to reach a population of 92 million consumers. With today's population of approximately 130 million and possible population growth, in 6 years more than 65% of Mexicans will consume at least $12 per day. 10th on the list is Bangladesh, whose consumer market is expected to grow by as much as 59% to 87 million consumers. This is the largest increase of all the countries mentioned here. Today's population of Bangladesh is almost 200 million, and with the current demographic trend in 6 years it may be about 240 million, which would mean that about 35% of the population will consume at least $12, but still 65% of the population will not be able to afford such expenses. These data indicate that from Bangladesh, like from Pakistan, part of the population will find better remuneration outside the country, and this is a predictor of migration. In 11th place are Germany, Turkey and Vietnam together, with a consumer market of 80 million each and growth of 0%, 8% and 34%, respectively. Today's total population of Germany is approximately 80 million, which means that with the expected lack of development of the internal market, in 6 years the entire population will consume at least $12 a day. Turkey's total population today is around 90 million, which with a current fertility rate of 2.1 could lead to a total population of around 100 million in 2030. This means that about 80% of Turks will spend at least $12 a day. About 103 million people currently live in Vietnam, and here similarly about 80% of the population will participate in the consumer market. The United Kingdom is in 12th place, with a population of 69 million consumers and a growth of 3%. As in Japan and Germany, almost the entire population qualifies as consuming at least $12 per day. Next are 2 countries, Egypt, the only African country in today's ranking, and very European France, with a consumer population of 68 million and growth of 25% and 3%, respectively. In France, almost the entire population participates in the consumer market, and in Egypt it will be about 55% of the total population, which today is about 110 million, and in 2030 it may be about 120 million. Next, the Asian country Republic of the Philippines with a value of 66 million, an increase of 35%. The current population of this island nation is approximately 110 million people, and in 6 years about 60% of the population will spend more than $12 a day. The Philippines is followed by Thailand with a consumer market of 58 million and growth of 10%. Today's total population is approximately 70 million subjects of the King of Thailand, which would mean that in 2030 approximately 80% of the population will be able to afford to spend $12 or more per day. Italy with a value of 56 million and a decline of 1% will still remain a wealthy country because, like today, almost all Italians will be able to spend $12 a day. But their population will shrink from about 58 million to 56 million and thus the consumer market will shrink. The top 20 consumer markets discussed here include Iran, with a population of 55 million people consuming at least $12 a day and a growth of 11% in relation to 2024. Today, the total population of Iran is approximately 90 million people, which means that approximately 55% of the population will be relatively wealthy. Interesting fact, Egypt, like Indonesia, is building their new capitals completely from scratch. In Egypt, it is the new administrative capital located 50 kilometers east of Cairo, built for the administration and approximately 6 million inhabitants. In Indonesia, it is Nusantara, intended for approximately 10 million inhabitants, located in Borneo. The new capital will replace Jakarta located in Java. These are not only huge infrastructure projects, but also a symbolic change related to development, vitality, and an optimistic view of the future. A similar project in the 1960s was carried out in Brazil, where the capital was moved from the forever great Rio de Janeiro to the newly built Brasilia. Today, Brasilia is the third largest city in Brazil. This may be negative for a city losing its capital status, but on the scale of a given country it heralds positive changes. Today's infographic concerns the year 2030, but it is a forecast of changes also for the further future. A company operating on the market of a given country depends primarily on the local population of that country. A richer society and a larger internal market enable the creation of larger companies in the local market. This, in turn, means that a given company, having a stable position based on a large number of consumers on the internal market, can accumulate the capital necessary for effective expansion into external markets. Leading companies in a given industry are able to generate such high profits based on the internal market that the owners of these businesses provide financial assets to several generations of their family. And it's happening even in small countries that are not in today's infographic. So in the case of the largest markets discussed today, the scale of capital accumulation will be proportional to the size of the internal market. Thus, the foreign expansion opportunities of companies established in the largest markets discussed will increase. Especially companies from smaller neighboring countries will not be able to compete with entities established on such large markets. On the other hand, the profits achieved on a large internal market may be so satisfactory that a given company will not feel the need to expand. Nevertheless, it should be expected that some companies based on the largest consumer markets will decide to operate globally. Entities from the previously leading economies of the USA, China, Europe and Japan will face increasingly stronger competition in the future. A reverse trend will also be observed, with currently operating global companies participating in the growth of new, important consumer markets. Companies such as Procter and Gamble, Johnson & Johnson and Nestlé own local brands in essential product markets around the world. For global companies, an increase in the share of revenues can be expected in proportion to data on the number of consumers in individual markets. The larger the market, the greater the opportunities to leverage your own position in trade negotiations. Ultimately, the fruits of growth will be shared among the various players as long as national economies remain interconnected in a world of global trade. Finally, I would like to talk about the threat resulting from the presented data. The greatest increase in the number of consumers will continue in Asian countries. Even with today's growth, these countries struggle to care for the environment. It is estimated that 9 out of 10 countries generating the most plastic pollution in the world's oceans are Asian countries. The Philippines is the leader. There are two main reasons why the Philippines generates the most plastic garbage that ends up in the oceans. 1. A large population and 2. Inhabiting a very large number of islands. Island countries were found to generate the most plastic waste per person. Logistics is the key. Plastic packaging is an excellent protection of goods during transport and storage, which is very important in island conditions, where transport is less efficient than on the mainland and the supply of basic necessities is rarer than on the mainland. Moreover, in island countries it is extremely difficult to organize an efficient waste collection system. Already in highly developed countries on the continent, waste collection systems are a low-margin enterprise, and in the conditions of island countries, these costs would have to be huge for organizing waste collection to be profitable. Unfortunately, the only method used in practice is to throw waste into the ocean and burn it on site. Only biodegradable packaging can improve this situation. Ultimately, it is hoped that the increased wealth of their societies and the involvement of governments, as well as advances in new materials, will lead to a reduction in the amount of waste that enters the environment in an uncontrolled way.